in the time of Mozart, everybody whistled his tunes on the street. And now, suddenly, I don't know why, nobody knows.
He's known as the Waltz King, a man whose music lifts hearts and brings tears to eyes across the world. With his trademark tuxedo and ever-present smile, André Rieu has built a global empire on elegance, romance, and classical charm. Millions see him as the embodiment of joy, kindness, and musical grace. But behind the violins and the flower-filled concerts lies a reality very few ever imagined. Because for all the harmony Rieu creates on stage, off stage, there were moments of deep discord. Quiet feuds, artistic betrayals, and even, yes, hatred. For years, André Rieu refused to name names. He took the high road, deflecting criticism and maintaining his polished public image. But in rare interviews, and through whispers from those closest to him, a different portrait has emerged, of a man deeply wounded by colleagues, dismissed by critics, and betrayed by people he once trusted. Now at long last he's begun to speak, not in anger but in clarity. In the names he shares, they may surprise you, because André Rieu, the man who made the world dance, also carries a list of those who made his journey hell. This is that story. To understand André Rieu's quiet rage, you must first understand the world he came from, a world bound by tradition, hierarchy, and rigid expectations. Classical music is not just an art form. It's a culture, a fortress of old rules and sacred institutions. Rieu, despite being classically trained at the Conservatorium Maastricht and the Royal Conservatory of Brussels, was never fully accepted by the establishment. Why? Because he dared to do what few had done before. He made classical music fun. He made it accessible, and to the purists, that was nothing short of sacrilege. In the early years of his career, Rieu tried to play by their rules. He performed with symphonies, followed the accepted repertoires, dressed the part. But the response from many highbrow critics was icy. He was told his music was too theatrical, his personality too flamboyant. And when he began, forming the Johann Strauss Orchestra in 1987, with the idea of playing waltzes and marches in grand, joyful concerts, the backlash was swift. He's cheapening the art, some said. He's commercializing our heritage. These weren't just whispers in the halls of conservatories. These were published critiques, snide remarks from professors, and dismissive sneers from rival conductors. One name Rieu has hinted in recent interviews still stings. A highly respected German conductor who once told him backstage, "Your concerts are for fools who can't understand Beethoven." Rieu smiled and said nothing at the time, but later admitted, "That moment changed me. I realized I didn't want their approval anymore. I wanted connection." From that point on, the divide between Rieu and the classical elite widened. And though he would go on to play for kings, queens, and millions of devoted fans, he was never invited into their circle. He was too joyful, too theatrical, too successful. Ironically, Rieu's critics were often the same men who spent their lives trying to fill half-empty concert halls with Mahler symphonies that no one wanted to hear. Meanwhile, Rieu was packing stadiums, bringing live classical music to more people than any conductor in the modern era. But instead of respect, he got resentment. "They hated me for succeeding where they failed," he once said. "Not because I was bad, but because I dared to be different." And he's right. Even today, his name is rarely mentioned in the same breath as the so-called classical titans. Despite selling over 40 million records, and despite being one of the top-grossing musicians in the world, Rieu remains an outsider in the very world that trained him. But the hate didn't end with the critics. It infected award committees, orchestras, and radio stations. His albums were snubbed, his performances ignored, his style ridiculed. Yet the audiences never left. In fact, the more the purists raged, the more people came to see him. But Rieu never forgot. And though he rarely confronts them directly, in private, he keeps track. He remembers the conductor who refused to shake his hand, the violinist who mocked him in an open letter, the music director who banned his name from programming meetings. "They didn't want me to play," he once said, "so I built my own stage." For André Rieu, his orchestra is not just a collection of musicians. It is his family, his sanctuary, and the heartbeat of his life's work. Since founding the Johann Strauss Orchestra in 1987, Rieu treated every member not just as a performer, but as a collaborator in a dream. He paid fair wages, offered full-time contracts in a world of gig-based classical labor, and created an environment that was warm, joyful, and filled with laughter. But even the most harmonious families can fracture. And some of the deepest wounds Rieu ever suffered came not from the music critics or jealous rivals, but from those he once called his closest allies. The betrayal began quietly. Some members of the orchestra over time grew restless. Rieu's concerts were spectacular, theatrical, and endlessly rehearsed. For some classically trained musicians, that meant their artistry was limited to strict arrangements, choreographed movements, and performances tailored more for entertainment than expression. A few began to murmur that the shows felt too scripted, too repetitive, or too shallow. To Rieu, this was the cost of excellence. To them it was stifling, and one by one, a handful began to break away. The most heartbreaking betrayal came from a concertmaster who had been with Rieu since nearly the beginning. A violinist of immense talent and charm, this individual had shared hundreds of stages with Rieu, celebrated birthdays on the road, laughed over backstage dinners, and performed side by side in some of the world's grandest halls. But after nearly 2 decades, he left, not quietly, but with an interview in a Dutch magazine that shocked Rieu's fans. It was no longer about music, he said. It was a circus. I needed to return to art. Those words, cold and dismissive, cut deeply. Rieu never responded publicly, but in a later documentary, when asked about the departure, his voice wavered. We build something beautiful together. And sometimes people forget how hard that is. Then there was the betrayal of friendship and ambition. A younger conductor who had toured with Rieu for years suddenly began mimicking his style, forming a rival orchestra, and even courting former members of Rieu's team. At first, Rieu welcomed the idea. He believed there was room for everyone in classical entertainment. But when this rising star began using marketing almost identical to Rieu's and mocking his theatricality in interviews, it felt less like homage and more like theft. Privately, Rieu told a friend, he didn't want to create something new. He wanted to take what I built. Even among the orchestra, whispers of jealousy occasionally rose. Some members felt others received more camera time, better solos, or more attention from fans. Rieu, ever the diplomat, tried to keep everyone happy. But resentment is a quiet poison. Musicians who once toasted to sold-out arenas began to grumble. A few filed lawsuits over contracts and payments, cases that were settled quietly, but left a stain that couldn't be removed. And yet, Rieu continued forward, always with that same disarming smile. But behind the scenes, trust had been broken. And for a man who valued loyalty above all else, that kind of betrayal was unforgivable. To this day, André Rieu rarely names the ones who hurt him. But fans who've followed his career closely know who left and why. They've seen the subtle changes, how certain performers vanished from the stage, how the music grew more scripted in response, how Rieu became more guarded in interviews. When you give someone the stage, he once said, you give them your heart. And when they walk away, they take a piece of it. But perhaps the most tragic part of these betrayals is what they cost Rieu emotionally. The man who once ran his orchestra like a family began treating it like a company, necessary for survival, but no longer open to risk. New members were carefully vetted. Rehearsals became tighter. And though the concert still sparkled with magic, the innocence, the trust, was never fully restored. What was once a dream shared by all became a vision protected by one. And behind the joy in music, André Rieu learned the hardest lesson of all. Not all applause comes from love. And not every smile on stage hides loyalty. André Rieu's gift isn't just the violin, it's his ability to connect. Over the decades, he's built a global community around music, joy, and theatrical brilliance. Collaborations were never just professional for him. They were emotional investments. But some of those partnerships, some forged in passion and creativity, soured into silence, distance, and betrayal. Among the many musicians Rieu has worked with, 3 stand out, not because of how well they performed, but because of how bitterly things ended. The first was a celebrated soprano from Central Europe. known for her radiant stage presence and powerful voice. When she joined Rieu's concerts in the early 2000s, their chemistry was undeniable. Audiences adored her, and Rieu praised her relentlessly in interviews, calling her a voice sent from heaven. For nearly 5 years, she toured with the Johann Strauss Orchestra, becoming one of its brightest stars. But things changed when she began pursuing a solo career, one that echoed Rieu's branding, visuals, and even musical selections. At first, Rieu supported her, but when she started booking tours against his own calendar, competing in the same markets, and claiming creative independence in ways that directly undermined his brand, the warmth turned cold. She stopped appearing in Rieu's productions with no public explanation. In a later interview, Rieu simply said, "Sometimes a bee," with a loyal heart. The second name stings even more, a classical pianist with whom Rieu once dreamed of producing a crossover album. Their early recording sessions were electric, blending Rieu's sweeping orchestral waltzes with the pianist's sharp emotive arrangements. But behind the scenes, egos clashed. The pianist wanted more control, wanted to co-direct the orchestra, wanted top billing. Rieu, who had spent decades cultivating his unique musical universe, was unwilling to compromise. The project stalled, and then came the betrayal. The pianist took early recordings, repackaged them, and released a bootleg-style album overseas without Rieu's consent. Though lawyers intervened and the release was pulled, the trust was destroyed. Rieu was devastated, not just because of the legal breach, but because the collaboration had been born out of admiration. He didn't just steal music, Rieu reportedly told a friend. He stole something sacred, the joy of making it. And then came the third, and perhaps most painful of all. A fellow conductor, older and once a mentor figure, who helped guide Rieu through his earliest professional years. This man, revered in European classical circles, had introduced Rieu to key venues, managers, and composers. Rieu often credited him in interviews, but behind closed doors, the relationship deteriorated. The elder conductor reportedly resented Rieu's rise, calling his concerts garish parades and dismissing his audience as musical peasants. When a major European festival once invited both men to share the stage, the conductor publicly refused, saying he would not be seen beside someone who bastardizes Beethoven. It was a brutal, very public insult. Rieu didn't respond, not with press, not with words. But insiders say that was the moment he finally turned a corner emotionally. He stopped seeking validation from the classical elite. He stopped trying to be accepted. "He killed the last part of me that wanted their approval," Rieu later said. "From then on, I played for the people, not the critics." If you're feeling the emotion behind this story, now's the time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. Which classical musicians do you admire most? These aren't just performances. They're human stories of pride, pain, and perseverance. Let's keep them alive. Rieu may not use the word hate often. It's not his style. But his silences speak volumes. These three musicians, once beloved partners in his journey, are no longer in his orbit. Their names have been scrubbed from his concert credits, their contributions unmentioned in interviews, and their absence deafening. The tragedy isn't just that things went wrong, it's that they didn't have to. André Rieu has always been generous, perhaps too generous. He trusted too easily, admired too freely, and opened his stage too wide. And when those he lifted up turned on him, he didn't retaliate with rage. He responded with absence. He removed them from his musical world and never looked back. But make no mistake, he remembers. And in rare moments, when the lights dim and the crowds quiet, you can hear the sorrow in his violin. The notes he plays aren't just music, they're memories. Of duets gone silent, of partnerships broken, of music that once soared, and now only echoes. Among the many musicians who've crossed André Rieu's path, critics, collaborators, conductors, and competitors, there is one name that has remained a silent wound. Hidden beneath layers of politeness and professionalism, a name that Rieu has never spoken aloud, but one that haunts nearly every interview, every guarded pause, every subtle deflection when the subject turns to betrayal. This was not just a colleague. This was a rival, a mirror image of what Rieu might have become had he taken a darker, colder path. And in the world of classical performance, Their story remains one of the most quietly devastating feuds the public never saw. This musician was once considered Rieu's equal. A virtuoso violinist, flamboyant in style, charming in interviews, with a fan base that grew alongside Rieu's own. In the mid-1990s, the two were often compared in the press, dubbed Europe's dueling fiddlers, though neither seemed to take it seriously at first. In fact, they performed together on a handful of televised specials, trading jokes, bowing in harmony, even embracing at curtain calls. But behind the scenes, competition turned toxic. Rieu would later hint that what began as friendly rivalry quickly descended into sabotage. The other musician, whose name we will keep anonymous out of respect, allegedly began undercutting Rieu's tours, booking cities just weeks before André arrived, slashing ticket prices, and mimicking set lists and show structures to confuse audiences. But the betrayal went deeper than just marketing. According to close insiders, this rival attempted to poach members of the Johann Strauss Orchestra, offering inflated contracts, promises of solo time and creative freedom. Knowing full well that Rieu's orchestra was his family. Some left, others stayed but reported the manipulation. When Rieu confronted him, the response was chilling. "You don't own classical music." It wasn't just competitive, it was personal. And it broke something in Rieu that has never quite healed. The press never caught the full story. To the outside world, they simply grew apart. But within the classical community, it was known. This was the moment Rieu withdrew from the circle of contemporary peers. No more collaborations, no more joint appearances. He stopped attending certain festivals, stopped appearing on award shows where the rival might be present. He retreated, not in defeat but in defense. "I will not play with snakes," he reportedly told a confidant. Music is love. He turned it into war. Even in recent years, when asked about this period, Rieu's answers become tense. "There are some musicians," he once said in a Dutch interview, "who play perfectly, but live with empty hearts." He didn't name the man. He didn't need to. The pain was written all over his face, and perhaps the greatest tragedy is this: André Rieu never wanted enemies. He built his career on joy, on inclusivity, on creating a world where music wasn't a battleground but a bridge. But not everyone shared that vision. Some saw Rieu's success as undeserved. Others resented his fame, his theatricality, his connection with everyday people. In a world where elitism still reigns, Rieu was an anomaly, a man of the people who dared to dance with tradition and make it smile. And for that, he was punished. Today, Rieu continues to tour, to sell out stadiums, to bring joy to millions. But the scars remain. The smile is still there, but behind it, years of rejection, betrayal, and heartbreak. He rarely speaks of those who wronged him, but their shadows linger in the quiet moments, when the music fades and only memory remains. For a man who has given the world so much beauty, it is a bitter truth that his greatest pain came not from failure, but from those who couldn't stand his success. As the final curtain draws near on his legendary career, André Rieu stands not just as a maestro of music, but as a survivor of a world that often chews up its kindest voices. He has forgiven many, but not all. There is one name, one betrayal, one haunting silence that even time cannot erase.